You don't file bankruptcy because you want to necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
You basically want to draw a line in the sand where from here on out, I'm only going to have what I either reaffirm some debt in a 7 or new debt. And hopefully you learned and you don't get into that position again. But without filing, you have all this debt lingering on you. How do you get rid of it? It'll follow you forever.
So if you track two people, one's carrying some debt and they choose not to file bankruptcy, and the other one files bankruptcy, and we fast forward 5 years later, the person that filed bankruptcy could be better off overall financially than the person that didn't.
Very likely.
And you've probably seen this a lot.
Hundreds of times.
Wow. Hey, this is Chaz Roberts. I'm a personal injury lawyer. It's my passion to bring the law to the people, and that's the purpose of this podcast. You are listening to Law Have Mercy. On today's podcast, I'm super excited to be talking to a bankruptcy lawyer. I don't know much about bankruptcy, but I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot. Mr. Shane Menard, what's up, buddy?
Oh, not too much. Just enjoying being here.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, man. Just tell me, let's start from the beginning. If I want to file bankruptcy, what types of bankruptcy are available to me?
As a consumer, if you're talking Chaz, the individual, it'd be consumer bankruptcy. There's a Chapter 7, which is generally considered a liquidation of assets. There's a 13 where you can do a repayment plan. You would also be eligible technically for a Chapter 11. Those are pretty rare on individual cases. And possibly a 12 if you were primarily involved in fishing or farming related operations.
All right, so a Chapter 7 is a liquidation?
Correct.
And that means I sell everything?
Not necessarily. Actually, the seizing and selling of assets to pay off creditors seems to be more the exception than the rule. And there's a lot of reasons why. A Chapter 7, there's a trustee appointed by the court whose job it would be to see what does this individual have that they can seize, sell, and use the proceeds from that to pay your creditors. Well, most commonly, the stuff most people have are not valuable. You paid a lot of money for it, but to go resell some furniture, TVs, there's no market for it. Or there's an exemption, which is very important in bankruptcy. It's a law that says you cannot seize something up to a certain value. Or you have a lien on it. You know, if you have a car worth $20,000 and you owe Bank of America $20,000 on the car, it's worthless to the rest of the world.
And the car is also reduced in value substantially from the time you bought it. So you might have bought a $40,000 car and it might be worth $15,000.
Absolutely. And often if there ever is going to be a situation where maybe you could lose a house. It's rare, but there are situations you may have too much equity. If we were in that situation, you'd get the advice of a counsel. If you seek a bankruptcy attorney, someone who does this every day, they wouldn't put you in that 7. We'd put you into a different chapter where the liquidation of assets wouldn't be an issue.
So who is your typical client? Who wants a bankruptcy or who needs a bankruptcy?
Well, ours run the gamut from business people who maybe had a successful business that it went south for whatever reason. Could be COVID.
That would be a restaurant,
for
example.
A restaurant. And you own the restaurant and your income comes from what you do. The restaurant may go under. That may be a corporate bankruptcy, a Chapter 11 reorganization of restaurant, or it just goes away. But you don't have your income. And maybe you personally guaranteed some debts. So it goes from that to, we even get the little old lady on Social Security who doesn't owe as much, but in relative terms to her, it's just as bad.
Okay. So let's say your average family, husband and wife, they have a home, 2 cars, they send their kids maybe to private school. Something happened in their life, maybe very expensive medical bills, some dad lost his job. Something happens where they owe more money than income, a long-term deficit in income, and the bill collectors are coming after them. Is that the time that they would maybe look into bankruptcy?
My advice would generally be as soon as you start having trouble making your bills, whether it be credit card debt or other types of debts, it would be beneficial to at least look at it, whether you wanted to or not. At least you would know how to go forward with what you're doing to not do something that would negatively affect the potential future bankruptcy. But yes, medical is one of our largest reasons. And it's not just the medical bills. It's also just you're out of work while the medical situation's happening and you're falling behind on everything. And if you do happen to be uninsured, as a personal injury attorney, you've seen what medical bills, hospital bill is for someone who's uninsured.
Absolutely.
It's not something a regular person could just make up or catch up in the future.
It could be a $70,000 bill for a week, a couple of days in the hospital.
Easily.
And yet they're living, this family is living their life
on $50,000 a year.
$50,000 a year, or making their normal payments, and all of a sudden they have a $70,000 bill that they have to pay.
Absolutely.
And so now they're in a defensive posture. They may want to consider at least having a conversation with a bankruptcy lawyer.
Correct.
Because a bankruptcy, if I'm understanding, it could potentially hold the creditors at bay and push the pause button.
Well, that's one of the biggest things that Chapter 13 does. With any bankruptcy, when it's filed, the court enters an automatic stay. And as a lawyer, you know what a stay is. It's just a prohibition against any further action.
It stops everyone.
It stops anyone from doing anything to collect a debt against you. The 13 then is a repayment plan. It's probably the bulk of my practice is 13s. And
so it's not people saying, I don't want to pay the bills. I'm saying just work with me in helping me come up with a payment plan.
I have some where they're paying back every dollar, but sometimes it's how much you owe. Sometimes it's how many people you owe. If you owe 5 payday loans, a couple of these other little loan companies, a bunch of credit cards, you just can't make the minimum payment. Whereas if we push that stop button, as you put it, you make a once a month payment, the money gets divvied up for 3 to 5 years between these creditors. You may pay them in whole. Now, how much you pay them depends on a lot of factors. It's how much you can afford to pay. It may be a percentage, maybe 50 cents on the dollar.
What's the least amount of debt you've seen people file bankruptcy for?
I try not to do it under $10,000. It's, you come into my office and you have $8,000 of credit card debt. That can often be handled some other way. Like, I'm going to charge you $1,600 is about the going rate, $1,700 for a Chapter 7, attorney's fees, court costs, all that. It's not good math.
Right.
Or quite often it may be somebody who's you're renting an apartment, you got injured, now you're on disability, Social Security disability. Well, they can't garnish a disability. There's no property to seize. You don't have to do it. Now we can do it, and maybe it would alleviate some of the stress in your life of these calls. Some of these creditors can be very harassing.
Now they have rules that they have to follow, right? Credit companies.
Yes, there is a Fair Debt
Collection Act.
Practices Act. I think a lot of collectors violate the FDCPA on a regular basis, but that's a separate issue from bankruptcy.
But sometimes it adds a lot of stress to people's lives.
Stress.
Yeah.
It's still stress.
So in Chapter 13, there's a payment plan and administered by a trustee, a neutral party within the system.
Correct.
Right? And in Chapter 7, all your debts are erased.
Yes, but when you file, maybe you have a home with a mortgage and you're current on your house. Well, you don't want to lose your house. There's an agreement basically called a Reaffirmation Agreement at Chapter 7, where if there's a secured debt, you can reaffirm that debt, which is basically putting you in the position with just that particular creditor, like the bankruptcy never happened. So, your mortgage, you'll still owe on it, your car, the bank still retains the lien, and you're agreeing that whatever you owed them on the day you filed the bankruptcy, I'm going to still owe you and pay you back. And it's always under the same terms of the original loan.
I didn't know much about bankruptcy, so I'm super excited that you're here because I'm getting an education. But I think I always assumed that for a bankruptcy to be started, you had to owe $50,000, $100,000, $150,000. I wasn't thinking $10,000, $15,000, $20,000.
It's relative.
Yeah.
You could owe $20,000, but if you owe it to 20 people, you might not be able to make the minimum payment. Now, those folks, a lot of times I'll advise them outside of filing a bankruptcy. There may be other ways. I'm usually leery of these debt consolidation companies, but there are other ways sometimes.
Why?
The
Why are you leery about debt? I mean, I see the commercials, right? And I see the ads and all that stuff. It seems to be like a big business with debt consolidation.
I'm not going to say it can't work in some situations. In some situations, it doesn't work. It is not uncommon for someone to come into us, and they've been dealing with a debt consolidation company for maybe 2 years. Okay, maybe they had $60,000 of credit card debt. They hire this company, and the company sets them up a payment, maybe $500 a month, let's say. But they may just send all your creditors a letter and just say, look, we're going to offer you a proposal, 0%, maybe 75 cents on the dollar. But if you don't respond, we're going to assume your debt's invalid. Well, that doesn't make it invalid. You know that.
Right.
So these folks will pay on that. And some of these creditors don't play ball with the debt consolidation companies. So maybe you're paying $500 a month for 2 years, and you did make ground on some of your creditors, but then that other creditor's suing you. They're trying to garnish your wages. You end up filing the Chapter 13 anyway, and that $500 you put towards the debt consolidation for the last 2 years could have been 2 years into your Chapter 13. You're almost done with it by this point.
I always felt like there's a stigma associated with filing a bankruptcy, whether it's a credit report, but it basically like a scarlet letter on their shirts walking around. What do you think about, is that a myth? Is that real? People's hesitancy to file bankruptcy?
I think the average person's belief in that myth is very real. Whether or not it's real in fact, I disagree with. I don't think it's real.
Meaning, well, let's just say this. Once you file bankruptcy, you can later take a loan. You can later go buy a vehicle. You can buy a home.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying that I don't think most people realize that.
Well, they think they filed, they're ruined for the rest of their lives. Now, bankruptcy goes on your credit report. Credit report's basically 7 to 10 years. Things will stay on there before they'll cycle off. Eventually, it cycles off. I have clients who filed the Chapter 7, and 3 years later, they're building a house. They had some change in circumstances in their life where all of a sudden they got a new job, got promoted, and they're making money. They built a house, nice house. Guy who lives about down my road, one of my neighbors. And I know for a fact that they had filed. Now, are you going to get the 0% down, 0% interest? No, until it's off your record.
And you probably don't deserve it because
you're a risk.
You're a risk.
Well, you're a risk, but you're also not a risk because you can't refile there's certain time tolling periods between when you can file certain types of cases.
That's interesting.
And it depends if it's 7 to 7 or 13 to 7, how many years.
So if you file bankruptcy and I never filed bankruptcy, technically I still have a bullet in the chamber you don't have.
I don't. If I filed a 7, I can't file another 7 for 8 years.
That's interesting.
I'm not going to, if I borrow money from you for my car, for a car loan, there's no 8-year car loans. Right. My car loan will be paid off before. Plus, I don't have all this extraneous other debt that most folks carry.
You have a clean slate.
Correct. And you don't file bankruptcy because you want to necessarily. Mm-hmm. You basically want to draw a line in the sand where from here on out, I'm only going to have what I either reaffirm some debt in a 7 or new debt. And hopefully you learned and you don't get into that position again. But without filing, you have all this debt lingering on you. How do you get rid of it? It'll follow you forever.
So if you track 2 people, one's carrying some debt and they choose not to file bankruptcy, and the other one files bankruptcy, and we fast forward 5 years later, the person that filed bankruptcy could be better off overall financially than the person that didn't.
Very likely.
And you've probably seen this a lot.
Hundreds of times.
And what's the
thousands of times?
Well, the difference between those two, could it be pride? Could it be maybe ignorance of the law? I mean, what? Right? I mean, that's the only thing stopping them, right?
Pride, a certain feeling maybe of a moral obligation.
Yeah.
Which, I mean,
that's real.
And I understand that.
That's real. You borrow money, you're going to pay them back.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a person of my word, and I try to give you my word. I try to do everything in my power to go through with that and to follow through. Sometimes life happens and you can't.
Yeah. We'll talk about life events like divorce, like an unexpected medical emergency or something like that. But some of this is just bad financial management?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like any area of life or the law. I think the law follows life in general. There's a certain amount of bad in every situation. Sometimes it's not always intentionally making bad decisions. You know, you could have turned left, you could have turned right. They chose the right. It just was the wrong decision. There's no malice or intent or anything wrong with what they did. It just things didn't go the way as planned.
When should someone file bankruptcy versus wait?
What the person should do is consult with a bankruptcy attorney, not a domestic attorney who does the oddball 1 or 2 a year, but somebody who does this day in, day out. Come see us. We don't charge for an initial consultation. We sit down, meet with you for an hour or two and look at your whole situation and figure out, should we wait? Should you not file? Do you need to file right now? Should you have filed 6 months ago?
And you're giving them actual usable information in the initial consultation, even if they don't hire you for free.
Very often, yes. Pretty much all the time. But
and
yes.
You're helping them with basically coming up with a financial plan. If they don't hire you, you're giving them that information.
Sure. And sometimes we'll get hired, but not for a bankruptcy. Maybe you only have 1 or 2 creditors. Well, okay, they sued you. We file a quick answer. Maybe we negotiate some kind of a payment plan. And you don't need the bankruptcy and the courts all involved and, you know, paying a trustee. It's not that much. We do that as well for some folks. And sometimes you just look at them and say, you really don't need a file. Now, if you do this might help. You know, if you have 3 cars and you only owe $20,000 and all cars are paid for, I've been there before. Why don't you sell one of these? But that's the exception. Usually, by the time they've seen us, they've kind of let it snowball out of control a little bit. Maybe they're getting payday loans. They had loans from every little loan company around town, and it snowballs. And usually, by the time they see us, I find it's usually later than they should have. They may do things that negatively affect their bankruptcy. Maybe transferring property.
So I think what I'm understanding, other than don't use debt consolidation companies, is if you start seeing yourself going underwater, or you have some type of major bill that comes through unexpectedly, like maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's a medical procedure, an uninsurable medical procedure, when something starts going south.
Divorce
is a big one, right?
Very big one.
You need to start talking to a bankruptcy lawyer sooner than later. It doesn't mean that you're filing a bankruptcy tomorrow. It means that you can maybe start getting your ducks in a row and be educated on the process, because you may need to file.
Exactly.
Why do people going through a divorce, what about that event causes financial issues that lead to bankruptcy?
It's not the divorce in and of itself. It's how they've structured their finances during the marriage.
Hey, it would mean the world to me if you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. It helps keep the show free, and it helps us book better guests to provide more valuable content to you. None of the opinions expressed by my guests are that of my own, and nothing we talked about creates an attorney-client relationship or could be construed as legal advice. Hope you enjoy the show.